Hello and welcome back to my channel. I am TheWhiskyAnorak and this is review 2B, where I'm going to be discussing the more than exciting topic of labels on whiskey bottles in particular. Not really covering other spirits, but I'm just going to be covering today single malt whiskey bottles. I've got a selection which are lined up in front of me, which you can see here. The reason why I'm going through this is because I think it's a good topic that relates to this, which I just reviewed in 2A, where I made a couple of complaints about the fact that it does not say on the bottle that it's non-chill filtered and natural coloured. I do believe it is, and it does say on their website that it is, but it isn't on the bottle. And it reminded me of a situation that I had with a independent bottler not too long ago, which if you've got the patience for it, I will recount to you, because I think it's quite interesting, some of the things that can go on. You know, the label's very important, and not for the reasons that some producers who produce, like, shall we say, maybe not the sort of bottles that I would buy, like the sort of bottles that you see in the supermarket. They tend to focus on giving lavish descriptions of the heritage of, you know, the distillery and the, you know, basically they just give cliches just to try and sell bottles to people who don't know what they're talking about or reading really. And I much prefer labels which give you information, useful information, and try and tone down on the unnecessarily dramatic descriptions. That's part of the reason why in my own reviews I don't like going into too much detail on taste and smell notes. I don't need to sell the whiskey to you, you know, because that's the job of the distillery, and it should be by what quality is in the bottle. And when I see like overly elaborate descriptions of smell and taste notes, I just sort of think, who is that for? Just as a side note, the best description I ever saw on a bottle for smell and taste notes was actually this. This is a Ralphie bottling, who you may have heard of if you're watching this channel, and this is actually the only bottling of his that I own apart from his recently released Boffey blend, which I'll be trying at some point. But this is actually a Kalila from Islay. It's bottled at 55.3%. You know, everything's on there that you could possibly want on this label, and he's managed to do it just on the one label as well. So it's a 9-year-old, it's from single cask, distilled at Kalila, distilled in January 2015, matured in a refilled barrique oak cask, natural colour only, no E150A has been added, non-chill filtered, bottled October 2024. So you can clearly see the dates that it was distilled and bottled, which is all good information. And this is the bit that I was talking about, which was actually inspiration for me to want to keep my smell and taste notes simple, even though I know Ralphie sometimes goes into a lot of detail and gives a lot of descriptors. That, you know, that's fine, that's for him to do. Personally, I find that the least interesting aspect of his videos, and anyone else's videos, to be honest. I kind of switch off because I know that I'll be smelling and tasting different things from them. I just want the main points. And on this bottle, which obviously this isn't a review, so, you know, reviews can have a little bit more than what's on a bottle, but I just think this is great. So he's put smell, vegetal, oily peat. No one could argue with that. Taste, soft, peaty, and intense phenolic. No one could argue with that either. And that's kind of like what I want to do on my channel, which is basically, you know, give descriptions that pretty much no one could argue with, or at least could understand why I'm giving them. You know, I much more want to talk about the quality of what's in the bottle and the production methods at the distillery a bit more. So, okay, so what I'm going to start off with doing then is tell you what I think should be on a whiskey bottle. On all single malt whiskey bottles, should I say, produced in Scotland. The Scotch Whisky Association, SWA, I would hope that they would include an ingredient list on the bottle. I think it needs to be on there. It's on every single item of food that you buy. It's on most drinks apart from alcoholic drinks. And I just really think that we are entitled to have the information. And this is the information that I would be requesting. So an ingredient list which would include and information list, should I say. It's not just purely ingredients. I would like the ingredients on there, and I would like it that they would have to specify whether they've added colouring or not. But the things that I would like to know on a bottle are the barley variety used and where it came from. If they know the farm, tell us the farm. It's always useful to know that. I've got bottles here where they tell you that sort of level of detail. The yeast variety, that'd be good to know. It's not essential because that's, you know, it's very much an Anoraki thing to want to know that, but there are some distilleries who are doing that, like Torabhaig on the Isle of Skye. They are telling people what yeast variety that they're using. Also Wireworks, they're also doing it as well. It's an English whiskey company based in Derby. They are telling the information on that on some of their bottles as well. So other information, I'd like to know the cask type, the size, how long that they, you know, the whiskey was in different cask types. If it had a double maturation or a finish, I want to know that information. And I want to know whether it's a first fill, second fill, third fill, whatever. It'd all be good to know. And if it's peated, I would like to know the level of peat, not only when the malted barley was dried using peat, the parts per million figure for that. I want to know the parts per million that's actually in the bottle, and that is something that Torabhaig do as well. They do tell you both values. So I've got a bottle, I think it's Torabhaig Sound of Sleet batch strength, where I think the figure before, sorry, when it was dried, it was 75 parts per million, and that's the phenol level in parts per million, and the phenol level in the actual bottle when you buy it is 19 parts per million. So that's really useful information, and it'd be good to know things like that. So, you know, releases like Octomore from Bruichladdich, where it's famed for being a super heavily peated single malt, they state the figure of peating, which is usually above 100. It can be as high as 300, I think, in some bottles, but they state the figure when it's dried. This is before, you know, before all the rest of the process, you know, so there's a lot that can go on from the peat intensity from when the malted barley is dried to when it's ultimately in the bottle. So, you know, I would really like to see a figure like that, but of course from a marketing perspective it's going to be a much lower number than the you know, the peating level of when the malted barley is dried. So that's why they don't do these as an advertising thing. But I just admire the transparency of companies like Torabhaig, distilleries like Torabhaig, who tell you that sort of figure, and I think there should be more of that. So yeah, so to summarise, the things I think should be essential on a whiskey label are the barley variety, where it's from. The yeast variety would be good to know, that's a nice to have. I would like to know the cask types used, how many, how long did it spend in each type of cask if it was, you know, matured in different types of cask. And I would like to know the you know, the proportions of first fill and second fill that we used, and more information on peating level if it's a peated whiskey. So with that, I think I'm ready to sort of talk a little bit about, and I'm only picking this company out because I've had a direct dealing with them, and it's a company called Fragrant Drops, and they're an independent bottler who are relatively new on the scene. I think they've been around for a few years, and I have bought several bottles from them. And sorry, let me just have a quick sip of water. And what they bottle is generally good priced, well priced, here in the UK at least, and there's been some excellent bottles that I've had from them. I did have a bit of an issue though. So I will hold these two bottles up and tell me what the difference is, if you can see. Apart from the fact that one's got a badger with a agave plant next to him, and one's got a web exclusive on. If you look at the labels, they're actually a different size. And if you look really closely at this one here, I'll move this one away so I can bring this one closer. I don't know if it's going to pick up on the camera, but the very bottom line, let me just check. Sorry, the line, not the very bottom line, but the line just above that does state the information that, you know, any whiskey anorak like myself wants to know, which is it's bottled, unchill filtered, undiluted and uncoloured from a single cask in Scotland. Great to know, great information. There is a lot of other information on there which is also good, which I'll go into in a minute. On there you may notice that it only has the bottom line, which is the address, which is also on the other bottle. So when I saw this, you know, I didn't pick this up when I ordered a few bottles at one time, you see, from Fragrant Drops. I didn't pick this up until after I'd got the bottles in, and I was quite surprised. I thought, why, when this was the earliest bottling out of all the ones that I had, right, this was the earliest one, and it made me think, why, when they've included that information on an earlier bottling, have they removed it from later bottles? It seems like a step back, and in this day and age, when whiskey dorks like myself want this information and it's going to help the integrity of the company, why would you take it off? It just seems absolutely backwards to me why you would do it. So I was so puzzled and confused by it, I actually emailed them. I sent an email to Fragrant Drops and asked them that very question. I asked them, why do your newer bottles not have statements to say it's unchill filtered and natural colour on the label? And in fairness, they replied back the same day. Their excuse, because that's what it is, whether true or not, their excuse was the labels on the bottles, when they were using this size of label, which is slightly taller, they said that the labels were coming off the bottles. Now, I'm looking at this label and mine isn't coming off. That's not to say that they weren't coming off anywhere, but mine certainly isn't coming off. That's all I can say. So it's up to you whether you think that's a bit of a cop-out or not. But yeah, I'm not sure how I felt about that. But yeah, they said that they had to make the label smaller, and because they had to make the label smaller, it meant they couldn't fit that on. And if you actually look, you can understand that, yeah, they probably couldn't fit it on if they use the same size font, which they sort of have done. A big part of Fragrant Drops is the artistry here, which is produced by either a local artist or I think one of the owners, she produces some of the art herself, but it's mostly a local artist, and obviously they want to prominently feature this on the bottle, so I can understand that, but I don't think it's a good enough excuse. But shortly after I sent that email, they did update the website, and they do state it on the website now at the bottom. They didn't before. Whether they did it because I complained or not, I don't know. Probably not, but in any case, it does say on the website, but that isn't the place for it. The place is here, and I can understand if they want the label to be, I'll show you this one because it's better. If they want the label to feature the art prominently, they don't want it covered with, you know, reams and reams of text. But one thing that stuck out to me in this particular instance was they've got this here, which says purveyors of high spirits. And if I turn this round, you'll see that the entire back there is completely blank. Why not just put it on there? It's a very cheap to produce piece of sticky paper, essentially this. Why not just print it on there so that people know without doubt, and people would appreciate that. So that's a good example of a company who started off well in terms of putting the information on the bottle and sort of taking a step back, and I do hope they see sense and start putting it back on the bottle. I have seen people say that, you know, the stopper on these is a bit silly, and it is, but I do understand that a new independent bottler in a saturated market needs to make themselves, from a marketing perspective, they need to make themselves distinct, and I don't blame them for that whatsoever. But yeah, you know, it is still very good whiskey. This particular one, I should have said what it is. It's Dalhuane Distillery, and it's actually matured, well, it's finished in a fresh tequila barrel, and it's very, very interesting, very enjoyable. And this particular one I had here was a Kalila, which is excellent, which I would almost rate nearly highly as this as well. Nearly, not quite, because this is probably one of my favourites that I have had actually, but this one is matured in a finished in a fresh Palo Cortado hogshead. It gives the number of the cask, it gives the age, it gives the percentage, and it gives the dates very specifically of when it was distilled and when it was bottled. And it gives you the number of bottles as well, which is also, I should have mentioned that on my list of things. I think we should know the number of bottles that were produced. So that's my little story about Fragrant Drops anyway. So to continue a bit further then, I'm now going to mention another distillery that I like very much, which is a farm to bottle distillery. I don't think that they do all, well, I know they don't do all the process there. They don't malt their own barley, but they do grow it on their own farm, and it's Daft Mill Farm that they grow it on, and this is Daft Mill. This is a single cask version bottle for Aberdeen Whisky Shop. this has got a lot of useful information on this bottle, and this is a very good example of what should be on a bottle in my opinion. So I'll just read out some things on here. So Daft Mill, a family owned and operated seasonal distillery, because they only produce for a few months per year. They have like a summer production and a winter production. Located in the heart of the Kingdom of Fife. Single cask bottled exclusively for Aberdeen Whisky Shop. Cask number 002/2009. Bottle number 143 of 222. So again, it's telling you how many, and that's actually written on by hand. I can see that. 2009, so distilled in 2009, bottled in 2025, and then it's got the name of Francis and Ian Cuthbert and the alcohol percentage. Grown, distilled, matured and bottled in Fife. So that's all good information. Then on the back, so that's just on its own, that's pretty good, but then they go that step further on the back. So I am actually going to read this out, or at least some of it, which is relevant to this. So they produce sometimes as few as 100 casks per year. The barley variety is Optic, so that's a big tick for one of the things that I want to see. It was grown in our south fields and harvested in the last week of August 2006. So it's even telling you where it was grown specifically to the field and the variety. It was then stored on the farm to be malted in Edradour during the summer of 2007. That's the local maltings basically to them, as far as I'm aware anyway. And yeah, that's all very detailed information. It then goes on to say this first fill ex-bourbon barrel was selected by Nick and the team on the 20th of November 2024 to celebrate their 15th anniversary of Aberdeen Whisky Shop. And a 15-year resting barrel has produced a spirit with balanced sweetness and spice, reflecting the hard work, patience and cooperation it took to bring it to bottle. That's like the most, that's the blurbiest that they get in terms of being like dramatic, and it's, I think that's a fair statement. And then it says it was distilled in our summer season before being filled on the 18th of June 2009. Has been bottled exclusively for the Aberdeen Whisky Shop. Now that's absolutely excellent information. Of course, this is unpeated, so there's no information about peat on there. And they don't mention the yeast variety either, but they do mention the barley variety. So, I'd say that's almost a gold standard in terms of information that's actually on the bottle itself. Now I'm going to move on to something a little bit different, which is Edradour, which is this, Edradour. This distillery, which I'm sure that you've heard of, this is the Heritage Barley release, and on the actual bottle itself, there isn't that much information. So it says AD Heritage Barley release, distilled and bottled by the Edradour Distillery, unchill filtered, natural colour, great, it's on the bottle, unpeated, golden promise, matured in bourbon barrels. So even on the bottle it says the barley variety on this one, so that's a big check. The most important thing about this one, however, and you may or may not know this, is that it has a QR code on there. Now I would prefer it to be on the bottle, but I understand they're going for a smaller label look on here because they want to have this sort of etching, this this embossed sort of thing on the glass here. So they've gone for a smaller, more minimalistic label. But what they have done though is they've provided a link to more information than you probably ever want, even if you're an absolute whiskey anorak like me. When you follow that link, it will take you to a website for that specific bottle, where it will tell you your bottle number, the number of bottles produced. It will tell you such detailed information. It will tell you the barley variety. It will tell you what temperatures the waters we use when they do the mash. So when they mash the grist, like the malt, the ground malted barley, they add waters in 3 different stages at different temperatures. It even gives you those temperatures. It gives you the cut points of the distillation as well, of when they started to collect the whiskey, at what point they started to collect the whiskey in terms of the alcohol percentage, and at what point they stopped the collection of the spirit that will become whiskey. For this batch, they tell you the cask varieties, the number of casks. They tell you whether it's peated or unpeated, because they do a lot of expressions releases where it's a mix of unpeated and peated, but in this case it's completely unpeated. Yeah, they tell you absolutely everything about it, to be honest. But it's not on the label, but it's quite easy to see. So I think, and it's more information than you could probably easily fit on a label, and it's got a few sort of graphics and stuff with it as well, which show the information in a easy to digest way. So that is also a gold standard, but in a different way to the Daft Mill. I've then got one which actually, ironically, even though this is one of my favourite distilleries, this is Longrow from Springbank Distillery, and this is the standard expression, although the other expressions that I've got from them are the same. The information on here is actually not the best, in my opinion. Springbank do post information related to the latest batch of releases that they do, but unfortunately, they don't go to, or at least I've not seen any sort of archive of showing previous releases. There's a way around that by going on a site like Whiskybase, and you can find your individual bottle and you can see the cask makeup and some further details. You don't always see the barley variety either, apart from on the local barley releases that they do. On the standard releases, they don't state it as far as I'm aware. So if I just go into what's on this label then, so it's Longrow. This is heavily peated Springbank, and it's double distilled instead of the 2.5 times distillation that Springbank is, or the 3 times distillation that Hazelburn is. Hazelburn's unpeated, Springbank is lightly peated, and Longrow is heavily peated, double distilled. It says on the back, and it's quite a simple label, it says, first distilled in 1973, Longrow is a double distilled, heavily peated single malt, produced at Springbank Distillery in Campbelltown. The malt is peat dried for up to 48 hours to give the whiskey a unique Campbelltown style smoky character. As this whiskey is not chill filtered, a natural haze may form when it is cold, but this will disappear when the temperature returns to normal. Now, what do you notice about that statement? It does not state that it's natural colour. So that's an oversight, I think, probably. On Springbank and Hazelburn bottles, it does state that information. So I don't know why it's not included on Longrow, but it needs to be. And even to the big plays in terms of integrity, you know, in some cases farm to bottle, or at least, you know, Springbank do all of the production on site in terms from malting the barley through to bottling. But I do think that they need to make sure that mistakes like that don't happen, and I do wish that they told us a bit more information about the barley varieties and where the barley's from, apart from not just on the local barley releases. You know, it doesn't tell you the cask types or how many. If you go on the website, it will, but on the bottle itself, it tells you almost nothing. I mean, the Ardnamurchan doesn't really tell you. Oh no, it does. It does tell you that it's matured in bourbon barrels. This doesn't tell you anything on the bottle. I think there should be at least be something, and perhaps they should consider putting some kind of QR code as well. It'd be quite easy to do, in my opinion. So yeah, so I think that in this case it could be a bit better. And I think I've reached the end of all the moaning I wanted to do about the bottles. So if you enjoyed this, please let me know, and I will be back in review number 2C, where I will be comparing those bottles that you can see on there. The one that my finger is just below there is the one that I've chose to compare this to, and it is a cask strength version of this one, basically, that from review 2A. And the other three there, we've got Ben Rinnis, we've got an Edradour 11-year-old bourbon cask, and we've also got a Balmenic, sorry, I said Ben Romac, it's not a Ben Romac, it's a Balmenic, sorry. Oops. So yeah, that's what's going to be coming up in the next review. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I try not to take things too seriously, but I do think that there is some improvements that could be made in terms of labels and information. And, you know, all of those bottles that I've gone through today, none of them have any excessive marketing blurb on them, really. It's all pretty focused and on what's in the bottle. You know, even though some have more information than others, I think generally these distilleries and bottlers are taking the right direction. But there is still some improvement that could be done, and you know, I wish that there was some sort of standard that dictated, that a higher standard that was dictated by the SWA on what they have to put on a bottle. I really do, because I think it would help things. But as it is, there are some companies who are going above and beyond what they have to do to try and provide transparent information to the customers, because that's what we are, and I applaud them for that. So with that, please join me in that next review to see where I'll be doing a comparison. And thank you very much for your time. Bye bye.